lot of people are talking about carbon. A lot of people are talking about decarbonisation engineering. Tell me what your view is, where you think it's going, and maybe how we can give the listeners a little bit more information on what it really is.
I think it's something that's still in the early phases, but definitely something that's going to be a major engineering consideration, probably within the next 5 to 10 years. A lot of government authorities are pushing it as well. So it's definitely happening already. And I think the next step of that is it's going to start to filter down.
Tyler Hill, welcome to the Entrepreneurial Engineer. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure.
So, Tyler, I need to know, in the next 90 days, what mission are you on and what are you trying to achieve?
I think that would probably be the mission that I'm always trying to achieve, and that's just to give back to the community. So that's one of the reasons I became an engineer in the first place. It's a rewarding career. You get to scope out a project that's trying to solve a challenge for someone. You get to design that project, work with them and come up with a solution, and then you get to watch that be built, go out to site, work out the problems that you might have during construction, and then go back later and see that in action. And I see that benefiting people every day. I think probably doesn't answer your 90-day part of the question, but that's what I strive to do every day.
How important is it? Because I talk a lot about project lifecycle, and to be an engineer who can be at the start and the finish, how important is that, do you think, in an engineer's career?
Oh, critical, and that's one of the reasons why I've made certain career changes because of that. Early in my career, I worked in a smaller office, and I was lucky enough I got to be part of that whole project life cycle. So right from tendering, winning the work, working with the clients, doing the project management, being a part of the technical side, and then a part of the construction support. I think that's critical for an engineer to be a part of that whole process. And if it's the same engineer, it also brings that consistency across the project as well. And then even going beyond that into more of the asset management space, having engineering input into things like maintenance, renewals. When do you start thinking about replacing an asset? That's one of the things I think gets lost in the profession a little bit. We tend to go, yep, construction's completed, and that project here, and we don't tend to think about what happens in the future when this project's being deconstructed. Should we be engineering solutions where we can reuse certain components? Should we be thinking ahead a little bit in that space as well?
Yeah, I often do see that there is less focus on the future, the operation, the maintenance, the demolition and rebuilding, or the reuse and recycling. And I was actually going to ask you about that, but you know what, I'm going to segue to it now because you brought it up. So, I mean, for that, how do you take a design and then think about that, not only just the end user, but think about that decommissioning, breakdown, reuse, recycling later, particularly with things I think about like concrete and steel, pretty much the building blocks of, what a current engineer's toolbox looks like. How do you take yourself to that future time when, we're living in the now?
I think for this one, you have to think more into the circular economy space, and that's looking at utilizing recycled products in your design. So that's where you're looking at how can I incorporate something like recycled plastic? How can I incorporate recycled crushed concrete or recycled glass into my designs? That's the first component. And then thinking about, is what I'm designing actually recyclable? Can this be broken down and reused in the future? So it's kind of looking at recycled products in, and then the recyclability of your product at the end of its life cycle.
How successful have you been? Because, I mean, openly in a lot of the work that I do, I'm constantly pitching things like recycle this, reuse that, whatever. And oftentimes I get the doesn't meet specification. We haven't used that product before. Something happened back in 1985, and that means that we just don't and won't use that particular material.
Mhm.
How do you break down those barriers and have you come up against those barriers to entry?
Yeah, I think that's one of the major challenges, and I think particularly um, from the consulting space, which is where I sit, we're not the ones that are taking on that risk. So we're not the owners of the asset. We're not the one that's going to be in charge of working out what happens if that risk goes wrong. And I think it's about communicating both the risks and the benefits of this new and alternative approach. And some of the ways I've been doing that is looking at bringing carbon accounting into some of my designs and looking at, well, if you take this new approach, you could potentially be reducing a huge amount of carbon emissions by taking an alternative approach to your design. Um, and then looking at, does it save costs? Um, and then try and also find examples of where that's been successful elsewhere as well.
Yeah.
Often I find that people will say, well, I've never done it before, but it could have been done elsewhere, overseas or other states. And just giving them that confidence that, this place does it. They've been doing it for sometimes 10 years and it works effectively. Similar conditions here could work just as well here.
Mm.
And it's about explaining, it might not meet this standard, therefore you'll be having these risks, but you'll also be having these benefits, and then letting them make that ultimate decision. And if they decide not to go down that path, well, then that's okay. That's their risk appetite.
Yeah, and again, very much wanted to talk about the low carbon future,
Mm-hmm.
something that I'm very passionate about. I do find that there are barriers to entry.
Mm-hmm.
The way you've just broken that down between carbon, risk, cost, future maintenance, and really looking at what the operational expenditure is throughout the life cycle is super important. And again, we're jumping forward to the future, but that's okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about that because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people are talking about carbon. A lot of people are talking about decarbonisation engineering.
Yep.
Woof, that's a big word. And then I'm I'm still not seeing it. I talk about it. I know about it. Great words. How are you seeing it now? What's your belief, vision for a low carbon future? And probably finally, where do you see this going? Because in my mind, engineering has to evolve. And I just because you're in the thick of it, you're speaking it, I can tell that you're doing it. Tell me what your view is, where you think it's going, and maybe how we can give the listeners a little bit more information on what it really is to hopefully influence their decision making processes.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that's still in the early phases, but definitely something that's going to be a major engineering consideration probably within the next 5 to 10 years. A lot of government authorities are pushing it as well, particularly Transport for New South Wales is pushing it. I know locally, Department of Transport South Australia is pushing it as well, and it's more on the mega project scale. So once a project reaches a certain cost threshold, are you actually expected to do a bit of a carbon account and work out between, from, I guess, the preliminary design around 50% to the construction design, have a 10% reduction in carbon. So it's definitely happening already. And I think the next step of that is it's going to start to filter down. You'll be expected to do it on smaller projects. Perhaps local governments will start asking for it as well. Um, and I think a key role that we can play as design engineers or consultants is educating our clients on what that is and how they can do it. Um, and it's really not a hard exercise to do. There's a lot of good guidance. Engineers Australia has just brought out a good guidance on carbon accounting and how you can go about doing that. And it's really just working out, um, breaking down a design into its material components, very similar to how you do a cost estimation, working out a carbon rate, and then summing that together, and then working out, okay, if I reduce the amount of concrete by this much, what impact does that have? And I've done this on a few of my own projects just because it's a passionate interest of mine. And you'll find that the amount of carbon you can save is tens of thousands of tons on an engineering design. And that's the amount of impact that we can have as engineers in that space just by making a few design changes. And when you communicate that across to a client, um, because a lot of people, a lot of even engineers who do this every day don't really understand the amount of impact they can have. Um, they get really passionate and interested in it and start really asking you more questions and wanting to do that where they can. So,
Wow. I mean, there's so much to unpack because there are simple decisions that can be made early in a design that could
mm-hmm,
save, as you said, tens of thousands of tons of carbon. I mean,
yeah,
a lot of people don't realize that. And I think too, what's important, probably from an industry standpoint, is that the community understands that as engineers, we can have a role that can not just build a dam or a wind farm or a solar farm or whatever it is, but we can actually be making decisions that could have an impact on the environment.
yep,
Engineers need to get better at that. But the other thing is that makes me think more is that, and we hear it all the time, over engineering, factors of safety, more concrete, bigger columns, bigger structures. How do you believe that this whole thought process or this design process about over engineering something, but then that means more carbon? How do we break that down so that we can influence an engineering industry that almost less is more in a way?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that comes down to really thinking about the level of service of that piece of infrastructure. Is it a really essential, critical piece of infrastructure for the community? Is it a hospital? Is it a place of evacuation in an emergency situation? In that case, then yes, we should have those higher factor of safeties.
Yeah.
Um, if it's not, then perhaps we could be a little bit more lenient on some of those elements, and that's where we can start introducing some of the more carbon saving mechanisms. A local road, for example, perhaps we could tone back on some of the pavement designs there. Perhaps we could introduce different types of pavement engineering, like pavement stabilization, for example. That's a good one. I'm working on a few projects in that space at the moment as well. Um, it's looking at it from that lens, more of a risk lens, I suppose.
Yeah, because that whole thought about lean engineering, lean design, how can we reduce concrete? How can we use supplementary cementitious materials, or like you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, glass or other recycled materials in, or more so in the concrete? So you may have more concrete, for example, but it has less carbon impact just by your design mix or how you might be supplying the mix. Yeah, it feels like you can almost still have the structure or the member, but
Yep.
how it's been, what the composition is slightly different.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of those SCMs or supplementary cementatious materials are mostly recycled products. So that's where you have things like fly ash, where
Yeah.
it can be, that's a good example of using a waste product as a way to strengthen your concrete and reduce the amount of carbon within it.
Well. So, I mean, on that, just that last part of the question is the future of that. We talked
Mhm.
about, decarbonisation engineering. You've obviously got the stock take of, your carbon footprint for your design. What do you think the future of that is?
I'm probably going to go down a different path on that one. And I think that the way that we do engineering designs is going to dramatically change in the future. And that's around risk, but incorporating climate risk into that space. So, a lot of the way that we currently do engineering designs is assuming things like a stationary climate, and a lot of the terminology that we use as well, like for drainage design, for example, a 1 in 100 year event.
Yeah.
Um, that's a way that we can quantify a level of risk. But now that term is kind of becoming redundant because every year the climate is changing ever so slightly, and a 1 in 100 year event won't be the same ever again. And how do we quantify that risk as an engineer? How do we design a bridge
Mm.
to be above a 200-year flood level when we don't know what that will be? How do we design a dam to be a 1 in 500 or 1,000 year flood immunity where we don't know what that will be? I think
Mm.
that's going to cause us to think in a very different way. And
Yeah.
that's where I believe we'll be able to make a lot of changes in that space. And I don't think anyone really knows how we're going to tackle that in the future, but it's certainly going to be a real shift in the way that engineers play in that space.
Yeah. Oh, look, my brain is pinging because I'm thinking, okay, you've got the 1% AEP, you've got the PMF. Instead of the PMF, we might have the PMC,
Yep.
just to use an acronym, but maybe no one got. But thinking that those profiles of um, probability and exceedances and bell curves almost that will continually change year on year on year, standard on standard on standard, will become what you need to design to. And I wonder, and I don't know if you know, and this is probably maybe a question, if anyone's out there, I'd love them to answer it, but where are the standards on this? Like, we obviously get, and I mean, Sydney, great example. We are PMF driven, 1% AP driven,
Mm-hmm.
floodline driven, multiple. We've got climate change assessments in flooding now, heavily pushed by all local government authorities. Where are we on carbon? Because I actually don't know. So I'd love you to educate me, please.
Yeah, honestly, where are the standards in regard to this? Probably behind where they should be. And
Yeah.
that's because standards are, they're written by volunteers. They're very time poor people. It can take sometimes 5 years to update a standard. And the
Yeah.
space is just evolving so rapidly. The way that we currently do standards just can't keep up with the change in the space. And we're living in such a time where there's such an accelerated pace of change, where we have things like climate change, we have things like AI coming into the space now as well. The standards are going to struggle to keep up if we don't find a way to innovate the way that we write them.
Mm, indeed. I will most definitely applaud that point. Um, I think we should talk about that more. I think the industry needs to talk about that more because openly, I almost feel like what you're talking about and what we're talking about here is almost an industry volunteering itself to make change. And I mean, even I know that it's about the standard, it's about the bell curve, the percentage, the risk, and those things need to be documented. So I'd only encourage that to occur because those benchmarks, are only going to save hopefully our climate into the future.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm. That was amazing. Thank you. I feel like we really dived deep on that.
Mm.
There's so much to do in that space.
Yeah, I could talk about that for hours. That could be this
Oh,
whole podcast if you want it.
Oh, hey! I mean, please carry on. I'm definitely not finished by any means, but it's nice to round something out with an action, and I always feel like that call to action is something I hope that at least the podcast and our discussions can fuel, and maybe it will be you. Who knows? You'll be
Nice.
there waving the flag.
Yeah, I'm down for that, Darren. I'm down for that.
So I wanted to talk about how engineers can become leaders
hmm
because seeing your trajectory and your career, and a lot of people talk about engineering leadership, engineering management. You're an engineer moving to project management. Is that a leadership role? I really wanted to break that down for everyone and get your take on that because engineering leadership is the future to be able to do the things that we just talked about. You know, that
Yep.
engineering leaders will be the ones to do those things. They will be standardizing decarbonisation, for example. You know, in my view. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think as a profession in general, engineers really keep to themselves a little bit. Um, and to be an engineering leader, I think we really need to have a voice, have input on some of these big policy and advocacy items, things like climate change, things like the housing crisis. Engineers need to have input because they're going to be the ones on the ground doing those things, and we need to make sure that the decisions that the decision makers like government are making in the
Yep.
allow us to do that. Um, and that's one of the key roles that I play at Engineers Australia is doing some of those policy and advocacy items. And it's also about uplifting the profile of engineers. The general public doesn't really know what we do, the contributions that we make to society and the community, and we tend to be undervalued as a profession. And I think the way to become an engineering leader is to have a voice, be an advocate, and really have a passion and follow that passion.
Yeah. Well said. 100% echo everything you said. I'm over here waving the flag. That's that's part and parcel of the whole premise behind what we're talking about and the conversations that we're having. So, well done. And also, I wanted to congratulate you, the winner of the South Australian Emerging Professional Engineer of the Year, and the National Star Award
Thank you.
2023.
Thank you.
Mate, congratulations. How did you do it? What did it mean to you? What have you done with it?
I think how I got there, it would have been some of the decisions that I made early on in my career, particularly around um, joining Engineers Australia and volunteering and giving back to the community. Um, I started with Engineers Australia right back in university. I was the student ambassador for
Yep.
Adelaide University. Then when I moved to the Northern Territory for the first 3 years of my career, I was on the Young Engineers Australia committee. We ran a lot of really awesome programs and events that were really tailored towards mentoring young engineers. Um, and then I moved back to Adelaide, joined the Young Engineers Committee here, continued to do that, got myself a position as the Young Engineers Rep on the Division Committee, and then really continued to not shy away from raising my opinion and my passion around certain topics. And I was lucky enough that the division committee was very supportive of that. They allowed me to step into the role of deputy president, and then now this year I'm taking on the role of the SA president position. Um, and that's probably how I used, I guess, those awards and accolades as well. It's really just around following that passion, really communicating why you're doing certain things, how they can benefit others. And I guess that's the reason why I won those awards. It's not something I was striving for. It just happened to be a consequence of following that passion, and certain people recognized that and nominated me for those awards, and that's how I got to where I am.
Awesome. So, I mean, should I salute for the president? No, I'm only joking around. No, I've been there. I've been there. No, I'm joking. I've been there at Engineers Australia. Yeah, I've been on the committees and the boards, and you know, this is how I feel that Engineers Australia needs to evolve to use the young engineers to pivot that industry and to be able to have those voices, to be able to speak up and talk about everything that you're saying, value creation, sustainability, decarbonisation, that the community can really understand. And I think it's voices like yours that need to be heard, to really, accelerate our industry forward in a world of change and the digital age. I mean, that's paramount that we have those leaders to actually deliver those messages that aren't delivered by the news or media. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's critical if there's a young engineer listening to this. I think in general the engineering profession values experience a lot, and that's needed for the more technical work that we do. But then you don't need to have years and years of experience to take on that leadership role, be an advocate, and share your voice. So if you're passionate about something, I encourage young engineers to go out and then do that.
Um, yeah, I talk about that competence leads to technical competence leads to confidence, right? And a lot
Mm-hmm.
of young engineers, they are passionate about things, and I think tech and AI and everything in our digital age is changing. And I want to pick up on something that you said because a lot of young engineers, in my mind, and at least in working with them every day, have this feeling that they have to know all of the answers or they have to be technically competent. And your point that you can be passionate and that's enough to be able to have a voice about something. Can you just rewind on that and just give us
Yep.
a really nice, step by step of that? Because that, at least that is something that I think all young engineers need to hear. Because I think a lot of them are holding back because they feel that they might get challenged for their opinion or maybe their passion.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I think you hit the nail on the head there, Darren. And I guess one of the mottos of the company I'm working for at the moment is fail fast. And what they mean by that is just don't be afraid to get out there, do something, have a go at that. And if you do fail that, take ownership of that mistake. Let the team support you, learn from that lesson, and then grow and then move on to the next project. And I think that's the mindset that young engineers have to take. It's don't be afraid to, raise your voice in that meeting. And if you say the wrong thing, you'll have that support, you'll learn that lesson, you'll grow from it, and you'll move on to the next.
Yeah, fail fast and fail cheaply.
Yep, ideally, yeah.
Yeah, the cheaply bit's important. 36% of listeners won't subscribe to this podcast, and that's a real shame. If you want to help me share the stories and help others learn and grow, then please like and subscribe.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I often reflect because, as a young engineer, man, I made some great boo-boos.
I'm
Um,
sure we all have.
oh
We
yeah,
all have.
yeah. And and you're just so much better for it. And I think there's something to be said about the deep end. But I guess where I was going is talking about passion
Mhm,
because sometimes passion isn't enough. I don't think you can be passionate about something and that means that, you're a guru or you're
mhm,
passionate about something means you know everything about it. And I often talk about young engineers finding their niche or a passion or just something that they know a lot about. It doesn't even really need to be engineering. I mean, that does help. But
mhm,
things like industry news, decarbonisation, whatever it is, that in my mind is the leverage that you need to speak up.
mhm.
You don't have to know everything, but if you're passionate about it, normally you find someone else that's passionate about it, and then there's your segue. So how have you used that to get to where you are?
Yeah, definitely. And I think another thing about passion, it's also realizing that you're not born with passions either. Passions are something that you grow over time. You'll have an interest, you'll spend more time on that thing, and eventually it'll turn into something that's a real passion. Um,
Mm,
and in terms of finding more, I guess finding like-minded people, that's where I've found the volunteering, joining the committees has really been helpful in that regard. Um,
mm,
I've spent a lot of the time on the Young Engineers Australia Committee, and that's been my way to find a group of like minded people who are really passionate about the profession, who are passionate
yeah.
about making change in the profession. And then I've also been a part of a lot of more special interest groups as well. In the climate resilience space, in the carbon space, and that's a good way to kind of really get the opportunity to learn from those really passionate experts. Um, and that would be my advice. If you know what your passion is, seek out other people through committees, through volunteer groups um, that you can really work with and really make change together. And I think it's important to do that outside of your own workplace as well, because you'll find that limiting in some regards as well. And just having different opinions, different ways of seeing how other companies do it, seeing how you can bring that back to your own company and make innovations internally as well. I think that's really important and critical.
Well, yeah, it's a great point because I'm obviously a big advocate of Engineers Australia. Um, done a lot of work with them over the years. Definitely want to partner with them if you're listening. It's coming. We need to talk, but more so, yeah, that seems like that was how you could accelerate to have the voice. How
Mhm.
do you think that's a correct statement?
Yes, I think so. Um, and it was good exposure for myself as well. Like through those volunteer groups, I was able to get speaking opportunities. Then that's an opportunity for me to post that on LinkedIn. That gets me exposure as well. And it's kind of a rinse and repeat. Someone else will see something. I'm sure I'm on this podcast because I probably spoke at an event, put it on LinkedIn, and then you saw that, and here I am. So that's the way I've done it personally. Um, it's finding that like-minded group of people really making a difference together, not being afraid to shy away from some of those speaking opportunities, getting yourself out there, getting yourself on stage, and letting people hear your passions and your voice, um, and then seeing where that takes you.
How important do you think personal branding is for young engineers?
I think it's critical for just anyone in general, even not engineers. It's that's the way you get exposure. It's great to have a voice and a passion, but if you don't have exposure or personal branding and no one can hear that, then it's not going to make a difference. So I think it's a key component, and it's something that a lot of people um, don't quite understand just how crucial it is, and it can be used for career development. Um, People might, recognize you from LinkedIn, and that might be how you get your next job opportunity. That personal branding is a key element, I think, to growth.
Well, yeah. Um, I'll just pivot now because I could only agree with everything you said. Um, tell me about the Northern Territory and having traveled there and been there, and I guess I've I've traveled a lot, and you were there for some time. How much does that impact your take on things, your how you view the world? Did that experience shape you in a way that you never anticipated?
Definitely, I think that experience has probably shaped my whole career. Um, and I guess I took that risk as a graduate, graduating from Adelaide Uni. A lot of my friends were taking roles in Adelaide or Melbourne or Sydney, and I was the odd one that decided to move up to Darwin and take a graduate role there. And people thought I was crazy at the time, but I got the opportunity to work, I guess, for a tier one engineering consultancy, but in a smaller regional office setting. And I
Yep.
think that allowed me to get experience on the bigger projects that the company was involved in, but then also the smaller local projects that really allowed me to experience that whole project life cycle. So as a
Mm.
graduate, kind of a couple of months in, I was writing tenders, I was winning work, I was managing projects, I was dealing with clients, I was doing the technical work. Um, and that's something that usually as a graduate you don't get exposed to all in one go. And that really, I think, gave me a real broad experience um, that accelerated my career. And I also had a lot of fun and a lot of adventures as well. Had the opportunity to work in First Nations communities, do projects in Arnhem Land in the Tiwi Islands. I got to go to places that usually you don't get to go to, and experience cultures that not a lot of people have the chance to experience. And
Mm.
that really gives you a real perspective on some of the work you're doing and the benefits that you're having to communities.
Would you do it again?
I don't know if I would do it again now, but I would, if I could go back in time, I would 100% do it again. I think
Yep.
I would recommend to any graduate engineer consider going out to more regional areas during the start of your career because it can really set you up for success.
Well, it's funny, and only because having so many conversations about this very thing and having only done it myself. in a developing nation, uh, it did change me, not just professionally, but personally. And I often reflect about that doctors have to go do a regional position,
Yep.
but engineers don't, lawyers
Hmm.
don't. I don't actually know if there's any other professions that do. I'll
Yeah.
be happy to hear about that if anyone has the understanding that that actually happens. But it makes me reflect that that actually doesn't happen. And I wonder how important as a profession that's something that maybe we should consider moving into our future.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think the benefit that it's provided me and my own personal growth has been huge. Um, and yeah, I couldn't recommend that more to young engineers out there. Go out there and experience it. And engineering is a career that can really take you anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't see why you'd want to stay in your own hometown. Go out and experience something, and then if you want to come back and bring those learnings back, do that. Or if you want to go out and see more of the world, do that. Um,
Mm.
Engineering is a career that can take you anywhere, and everywhere needs engineering. Whether it's the middle of Australia, the middle of the ocean, space, it's everywhere.
Well, yeah, I often say, like, I say to the young engineers, look, I'm more than happy for you guys to, like, go experience the world, but just come back so that you can keep working. It's hard. So,
Mm.
tell me about what you're working on right now. Give the listeners
Mhm.
an insight. What are currently some of your biggest challenges? Maybe a
Mhm.
project example. Give the listeners a bit of a feel for what the day to day for Tyler looks like.
Yeah, so I work for Sprout. It's a more smaller kind of boutique engineering and urban design consultancy. Um, and I ended up taking that role because I wanted something similar to what I had at the start of my career, that more smaller office environment, that friendly atmosphere, that you get to be involved in the whole project life cycle from start to finish. Um, and I was fortunate enough to be given a leadership role in the business. So I'm currently managing the civil team. I have a team of about 5 to 6 engineers, designer, drafters, um, and we're working on a bunch of different exciting projects, lots of local government projects, which are the ones I really enjoy. They're the ones that as a local government, they're really striving to build projects that benefit the community. That's their main mission, and I really enjoy working with them to achieve that. And we're doing a lot of cool things: road designs, reserve upgrades, stormwater infrastructure, really critical infrastructure projects that really benefit the community. I'm doing a few pavement stabilization projects at the moment as well, which scratches my sustainability itch. And
Mm.
yeah, it's an exciting time being part of I guess, a small growing business in a really dynamic team, and it's a very diverse business as well. I get to work with landscape architects. I get to work with asset management professionals. We have a team of traffic engineers. So we really have that cross discipline expertise, and I'm getting exposed to a lot of that as well, which is what I enjoy.
Well, yeah, I being in the space that you're in and understanding the complexity and the nature of the urban design, the engineering around roads and drainage, and
Mhm.
really, pads and open spaces and whatnot. How important do you think the exposure to a multidisciplinary team as an engineer is?
I think it's critical, because nothing in reality is one discipline. You go to construct something, and it won't just be the optimal civil engineering design. You'll need to consider, the urban design, what it looks like, how people are going to utilize that space.
Wow.
Um, you'll need to factor in, I guess, the usability, the engineering aspects of that as well, the drainage design, the civil design, how that's going to interact, for the local community, but also for the wider, more network level approach.
Mm.
Um, and that type of stuff, if you're only exposed to one type of discipline, you'll never really have an understanding of how that all ties together. And I
Mm.
think as you move into more of I guess, a project management role or a business management role, you really need to have a good understanding of how fundamentally all those things work together. So I think it's critical to be exposed to wider disciplines.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Often I find that an engineer that could be on site has an insight to design. Um, Engineers who work with landscape architects understand, what, a tree pit is or
Hmm.
what the soils need to look like under a tree. Uh, I feel that, sure, you need to have your niche engineering, you need to have your specialists in their field, but a lot of the time, and I think more it is, I feel it's more, I don't know, maybe you can quiz me on this and challenge it, but I feel like most of the time it's in the ground. Um, I feel like once you get above ground, you're in a structural engineering, you're in a facade engineering, you're in a building service engineering, and they seem to have their own understanding of what's happening. But I always find when it's in the ground, that's when all of a sudden it becomes much more like, whoa, if I don't have an appreciation of the utilities, the drainage, the pavement, the curbs, the offsets, the alignments, the
Hmm.
3D nature of the what's happening underground, then you really won't be able, you just can't be isolated. You can't be in a silo just doing your own thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even when you start getting to that structural engineering stuff, there's still a level of interfacing with other professions. Even for structural engineers, it's the time again, engineers versus architects. We want to design the,
Yeah.
if it was up
Yeah.
to
Ooh,
engineers,
ooh,
we
ooh.
would
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
everything would look the same. We'd use the same design for everything. But then an architect, it all has to be different. Everything has to be unique. And it's that, and it's that clash, constant clash. And you really have to learn to work together in that space. And I guess a traditional structural engineer and architect. For civil engineers, probably a landscape architect. And I've learned a lot working with them and being in the same office with them. I sit right across from our landscape architect, and we're always having conversations around. And I'll say, look at this awesome drainage design, isn't it great? And it'll be, no, that looks ugly. It's made of concrete. Let's put some grass in there or something. So it's that type of interaction where
Mm.
you really push you really push each other to I think, get a better design outcome for the community by working together and working closely together.
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. Um, we often say, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the community that has to take, the built form environment. It's the community
Hmm.
that has to build a house on the pad with the drainage that you've designed.
Yep.
Um, I don't think a lot of people realize that. And I guess that's part of our mission. So Tyler, tell me what's next for Tyler Hill? What is next for you? Any dreams, goals, aspirations? Put them out there because then you have to do them.
That's right. I think about this a lot because I think I'm in the lucky position where I've achieved a lot of my goals really early on in my career. Like I've won Engineer of the Year. I'm currently leading a team. I have a leadership role with Engineers Australia as well. I think my current goal is to just do those and do them well. And
Mm.
then after I've done that for a few years, really work out what's next from here. Um, I think it's good to have that. It's good to have goals, but then you really need to constantly reflect on them as well. Like, I want to get here. What's the step in between? Well, now I've achieved this. Let's take some time to reflect and really live in the present and then work out what's next. So for me at the moment, it's really just, I guess, living in the present, trying to become a good leader, both, I guess, in my day job and in my Engineers Australia role, and then work out what my next step is from there.
Mm. Yeah. Um, there is a lot to be said about just doing.
Hmm.
A lot of people I know do always plan, plan, plan. They're always planning the goal of the next thing, the next thing. And a lot of the time you'll find that by just doing the doing, you'll end up being at the next thing anyway without even
Yep.
planning it. So, yeah, I think that's an amazing plan. I do hope a lot of other young engineers are listening to that because that, in my mind, is their pathway to success.
Yeah, but I agree. And I've got there from probably just following my passion. As I mentioned earlier, I never intended to win awards or get these leadership positions, but just following that passion, finding a company that aligns with your own personal mission as well, I think is critical. And then
Mm.
from there, you really set yourself up to succeed.
Well, if there was one thing that you could, you know, provide some advice for the young engineers out there listening to this,
Mhm.
to enable them to maybe follow in your footsteps or follow their passion or whatever it is. If there's just maybe one thing that you could give them, a little tidbit, what would that be?
I think that would be to say yes to every opportunity that comes across your desk, because sometimes you don't know what your passion is, and to find it, you have to experience it.
Yeah,
And the more you can experience, the more likely you are to find what that is. And that's what I did early on in my career. I said yes to going to Darwin. I said yes to working on major projects. I said yes to traveling around the remote Northern Territory. And that is what really sparked a lot of the passion in my career. And that's the advice I'd give a young engineer. Just take the opportunities when they come. And if it doesn't work out, you don't have to do it again. But so you might find what you're passionate about.
yeah, absolutely love it. Couldn't agree more. I've talked about it a lot, posted about it. There's such a no culture,
Mm-hmm.
no, got to protect my time, say no more. You have to do the things that you have to do. It's not what about everyone else wants. And I really am thankful that you said that, because people just need to be in this position as a young engineer, a young professional. Just say yes. Say yes to the opportunities. Go to Northern Territory, go to Vietnam, go where whatever it is, because those are the things that will unlock your potential.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You just get yourself outside of your comfort zone. And that's
Yeah.
what I've done. I was never, if you told me 10 years ago that I would be regularly public speaking in front of, 100, 200 people, I would have said, no way. There's no way I would be doing that. But now I do that, once a month, once every few weeks. It's pushing yourself, seeing how far you can go. And I think that if anyone does that, they'll surprise themselves with how far they can go.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I sincerely hope that one day I'm in that audience. I'd love to hear you speak. I'd love to, do something. I think, it'd be great to have you up in Sydney. And yeah, again, definitely applaud you. And you're right. What you said is, it wouldn't have been from a LinkedIn post where I wouldn't have reached out to you. And
Mm,
that in itself, I hope, shows other engineers the importance of their personal brand and
yeah,
the importance of
100%.
putting themselves out there. So this very conversation is the reason why other people should listen and take note and put themselves out there to accelerate the engineering industry.
100%. I couldn't agree more with that.
Awesome. Mate, Tyler Hill, thank you so much. I've had an amazing chat. I've really enjoyed diving deep into decarbonisation, amazing insights for the young engineers. And yeah, once again, congratulations. And I'm looking forward to having another chat soon, because I feel like we should.
Yeah, me too, Darren. I think we should definitely keep this conversation going. Look forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed that podcast. Please like and subscribe. It helps us reach so many more aspiring engineering professionals and entrepreneurs. You can find us on LinkedIn, Spotify, and YouTube.